In our practice, when a person wakes up in the morning, before they do anything else, you know what they're supposed to say? I'm grateful to you, God, that you brought me back to life. I'm alive. Thank you. Then there's a whole series of blessings. Nowadays we say them from a siddur, we say them when we're already in the synagogue, but according to the way the Talmud describes it, it's the blessings are said like as a play-by-play of a person waking up in the morning. They open their eyes, they say, "Blessed are you Hashem who gives sight." Right? You get dressed. Blessed are you who provides clothing for people so that they don't go exposed, they don't go uncomfortable, cold. You know, you loosen up a little bit from the bed. Blessed are you Hashem who loosens the bonds. You know, people could be curled up. I don't know if you ever have had the difficult experience of, you know, being by a sickbed of somebody who's like curled up. You know, they can't move. There's so much to be thankful for. So, you know, okay, so there's a script we read. Thank you, expressionless, right? But when we get bopped, boy, there's no need for a script and plenty of expression. So Abraham was the opposite. Abraham loved the world. He loved God. He had more than what we would call normally a person's share of problems and challenges. Didn't change a thing. He was a happy person. He was a person who realized that he was living in a world where God was a gift. And so, he was able to spread what he believed. And I shared with you a little bit, again, going back to the original sin. The original sin was to portray God as trying to deprive us of opportunity. Remember? The snake goes over to Eve in the garden and says, God said you can't eat from all of this stuff. The garden paradise filled with the most beautiful trees and everything gorgeous. For man to use. She says, you can't use that. He says, of course we can. God wants us to enjoy. He just told us to stay away from the tree that's going to kill us. The tree of knowledge, that when we eat from it, we're going to die. That's all God wants to hold back from us. He wants us to have the good. To which the snake said, you bought that? When you eat from it, you're going to die. When you eat from it, you'll be like God himself. So he's letting you have some stuff, some nice things, but he's withholding from you the really good things. And that started a story which continues until this day, which is that God is about bringing difficulties upon people. And when God tells us to do something, it's to restrict us, not to direct us to that which is good and life-giving. And that stinks. Like, who would want to serve God like that? So when he comes and says, you're not listening to me, I'm going to destroy the world. Okay, do I really believe it? You know, if I feel like it's really going to happen, so maybe I'll do it. But otherwise, where does motivation come from? So our father is Abraham. Our religion is the religion of the God of Abraham. We are supposed to view life as opportunity, and God is the one who grants that opportunity. So that's the middle of the discussion. We're not finished yet. We still, I think, ought to explore at least one other idea, one other understanding of the difference between Abraham and Noah. Why it is that Noah we're aware of. We know we're all descendants of him. He hardly appears in our words, in our thinking. When we pray, we say, Blessed are you, Hashem, God of Abraham. When we make that Mishabrech prayer, we say, He who blessed our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't say, He who blessed Noah. Noah doesn't get much coverage. Abraham does. Abraham turned things around. Noah salvaged. Not enough to salvage. So where does Abraham's effectiveness come from? So let's look at one other angle of this. And it's an important angle. Now, when God created the world, He talked to man. Adam, the first man, knew about God. No questions. Just a couple of generations later, people started worshiping other things. What happened? So, Maimonides writes, sort of, so to speak, the history of religion, of paganism. He says what happened was people said, okay, there's a God. But does God have interest in little old me? You know, there are all kinds of other things in the world. Now the sun shines visibly down on the earth. And God put it in a prominent spot and gave it a very prominent role. We should probably pay homage to the sun. And they began to worship the sun and the moon and the stars and the god of the wind and everything else. They worshipped all of these forces, whether they saw them as spiritual forces, whether they saw them as physical, material forces. But of course they knew that somebody created them, says Maimonides. They just said, but that somebody who created them, he's all the way up there, and this thing is a little bit more accessible. So presumably that's what he wants. Right? You don't, when you have something that goes wrong with your computer, you don't call Mr. Dell or Mr. Apple. You know, right? Who do you call? You call somebody 50 rungs down the ladder, right? Because he doesn't want to be bothered with your question about your computer. That's why he has all those different people. That's why he has a hierarchy. That's why there's a structure. So presumably, God doesn't want to be bothered with us, right? So he has all of these other things. And Maimonides says, but eventually what happened was, you know, that's a half a problem. It's a problem. But it's a problem because the truth is, God's not too busy to be bothered with us. God doesn't have a busy problem. Anybody who wants to connect him directly, he wants to connect to directly. But the big problem that grew was that when you spend enough time worshiping the sun, you can forget that there's something behind the sun. That there's an original creator of everything, including all of those forces, all of those things that we see in the world. And what happened was it went from believing in God, the creator of the sun, to just the sun as God. And that's what happened. That's what happened. That's the way idolatry was born. That's the way pagan worship was born. And says Maimonides, he says, but you should know, at all times, there were people who still maintained and understood that there was a God creator of the world. Adam had a son, Seth. He believed. There was one of the descendants in the chain name was Chanoch. Enoch, he believed. Methuselah, the longest living person in the world, was a very righteous person. He always knew about God. Noah knew about God. Shem, the righteous son of Noah, knew. Aver, they all knew about God. God was never completely forgotten from the world. But the world was widely overtaken by idol worship. One of those idol worshippers was a young boy named Abraham. Because his father, Terach, was an idol worshiper. A big idol worshiper. A promulgator of idol worship.
Didn't he own like an idol shop or something?
According to Medrash, he had a shop where he sold idols. Right? Idols are us. Right? So he was a spreader of idol worship. And of course, his child is born. So what happens? So he comes with him to whatever the temple was, whatever the church was on Sundays. Avram grew up with them. He was worshiping idols. But Avram started to wonder. And he said, I don't get this. What is this thing with worshiping idols? What are they? Where do they come from? Where did all of this come from? We're going to worship this, but where did this come from? And Avram, as a child, started wondering and questioning and wondering and questioning. And as time went on, he realized that this magnificent structure called the world cannot be a product of itself. That there had to be a force beyond it, in a certain sense an almost unknowable force, but a force beyond it that created it all. And when he did that, he rejected the idol worship of his family. There's a famous midrashic story, right? You bring up the idol shop, that Avram was once left at home alone, and what did he do? He went and he smashed all of the idols of his father.
Except for one, no?
Except for one, in which he
put
he put the hammer, he put the baseball bat in the hands of the one surviving one. His father comes home, and he sees his whole shop in ruins. He says, what happened? What happened? So Abraham said, it was horrible. He says, what happened? He says, it was horrible. He says, that idol over there, it took that baseball bat, and it went and it smashed all the other idols in the room. And his father said, give me a break. What are you talking about? That can't happen. So Abraham says to him, you hear what you're telling me? This thing that you worship couldn't even smash a room full of idols. And that's what you worship as the master of the universe. Right? That was Avram sort of giving lip to his father. And Avram rejected it. And he came to belief in God. He got in big trouble for it. His father gave him over to Nimrod, who was the king of their area, who didn't want anybody worshiping anything other than idols. And according to tradition, he wanted to put Avram to death. He wanted to throw him into a furnace. And he threw him into a furnace. But Avram emerged unscathed. So whatever the story, that's the story of Abraham. So what's the difference between Abraham and Noah? Maimonides says Noah was one of those people who never forgot that there was a God of the world. So he believed in God. Abraham discovered that there was a God of the world. What's the difference between them? That's right. Avram was a Baal Tshuva, and Noah was an FFB, that they call, you know, right? From birth. So what's the difference between those two? So I'm going to give you an example from a different place. A very, very, very real example from a different place. So there's this guy, and he grows up in Westchester. He's a child of privilege, and he grows up very fine, squeaky clean, does what he's supposed to do. He decides that, he likes to be in the helping professions, and he decides he wants to be a social worker. And he's going to work with kids who could use the help of a social worker. So he goes to school, and somewhere along the way, he gets put on a clinical assignment, a practicum, to be able to get his degree. And what do? They put him in a public school in the inner city. And he meets there a bunch of kids who did not grow up with privilege, who are what it would seem to be hopelessly stuck in a world of drugs, irresponsibility, single parenthood, academic failure, the works. and they put this guy in there to have the assignment of being the social worker for this group. Now next to him, joining him on this practicum, is another guy who went to social work school. This fellow is a child of the inner city. His father was in jail when he was born, and he wasn't married to his mother. Somehow or another, miraculously, he was not born with brain damage, despite the kind of stuff that his mother was doing while she was pregnant. Every other day, and I'm just drawing a picture, which is, about a mile away from my house. I live in a famous city. President Trump made it famous, Baltimore, right? So like we have a real inner city in Baltimore, right? And you go down a mile, right? And there you'll have, right? People who every day, I shouldn't say every day, but every week, somebody is shot on their block.
It's like that in Toronto now. Always you hear shootings, stabbings.
Yeah.
It's getting crazy.
Toronto probably has a way to catch up to Baltimore, but
yeah.
but like that. And this person grew up exactly there, right? But they're Ben Carson, They grew up in the. This is not a political statement, right? They grew up in a very, very difficult thing, in a very difficult situation, and they managed. Okay, maybe they had a heroic mother. Maybe they just did it by themselves. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. While everyone else was bailing out of school, he went and he did and he worked and he got himself to college, and he's now completing a master's in social work. And his goal in life, he got this practicum, he gets to go back to his neighborhood. So you have these two social workers. How's it going to go? Somebody play it out for me.
The one that's privileged won't be able to relate properly to all the people there, so to him it's all, no, it's okay, listen, it's a hard time, whereas everyone looks at him like a joke because he can't relate. Whereas the guy that grew up in the inner city, he can relate to them. He's been there. He knows. He can empathize better with all the people that are in the program.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. He can empathize. The other guy is coming from a different planet. How do you connect to that? Another step.
The guy who grew up in the neighborhood, he has a drive. He has something that he's trying to fix that speaks to him on a personal level. Whereas the other guy is kind of like, sounds cool, I'll do it. So he's more likely to give up. He's not going to have as much patience. He's not going to have as much understanding. First guy, doesn't matter what it is, he's going. So he's never going to give up. He's not going to look left and right. And he's not going to stop until he gets what it is that he spent his entire journey on for.
Great. Good. Anyone further? I would add a twist. It's all 100% true, 100% accurate, and you see that difference. Maybe, and I think it's implicit in what you're saying, is that, the first guy might not even believe that it can be done. Right? When he went to social work school, what he was thinking was that he was going to help these kids who, like their mother drove them to soccer practice too early, and they were traumatized by that. Like to him, like those were the kind of issues, My parents got me a Chevy when I was in 12th grade, while the other guy, his parents got him a Cadillac when he was in 12th grade. How do I manage with that? He looks at a bunch of kids like this from the inner city, and he says, I'm wasting my time. This is a hopeless bunch. How's anybody going to pull this group out of here? Forget about it. Whereas the second guy says, that's me. I was exactly in that boat. I'm not giving up on anybody. If I could be here, then he could be here, then she could be here. You see, Noah was the last of the Mohicans. The Mohicans. It's a book. Huh?
I got the rest.
He was the last of the faithful. The world had gone to pot. It was messed up completely. And he had no precedent, no basis to think that you could bring it back. He had held on to belief. He had held on to belief in the one God. Everybody else, they went from belief in the one God to start worshiping the sun, to forgetting about God. And when you go there, do you ever come back? Who comes back? And remember, what came along with it wasn't just that they forgot about the worship of God, but it became a society that degenerated into just stabbing each other, harming each other, stealing from each other, as we discussed, as we saw. And he looks at them and he says, this is a hopeless bunch. You tell me, God, go, give them a message. In 120 years, the world's going to be destroyed. Change your ways. I don't believe they can change their ways.
That's why he gave him so much time.
Maybe that's why he gives me so much time. Think I'll have a long-term project, but I don't believe it. And if you don't believe it, how successful are you going to be? Right? That person who's there and he's assigned to the job, to the task, to be the social worker for those inner city kids, and he, in his heart of hearts, feels it's hopeless. They're not going to be able to change. You think he's going to change them? You know, it works with everything. Somebody once turned it into a formal study. It happened as an accident. It's a famous thing, and someone turned it into a formal study. What happened was there was like a math teacher. There were 2 math teachers for different sections of whatever grade it was. There was the higher level math teacher and the lower level math teacher. And they started the semester by mistake. They flipped the class. And they gave the higher level math teacher the group which was poor, bad students. But he thought that he was teaching a classroom full of kids who were fantastic at math. And they rose to the challenge. When you say, you got the lower level group,
A bunch of lost cause kids.
you teach to that. And you think, okay, so what am I going to do? I'll remind them of last year's formulas. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? But when you believe that the people in front of you can go places, and then the message which you give them is going to hit. It's going to hit. Then you're going to be able to have that possibility. And that was a difference between Noah and Abraham. Because Abraham was part of that society that had forgotten about God. And he figured out by himself, completely and totally by himself, how to be able to find the right way. And he says, hey, if I can do it, they can do it. Anybody can do it. And certainly with a little bit of help, they'll be able to do it. So Abraham was not just that what he believed in. Last time we talked about a part of it, which was that Abraham was inspired about God. So he wanted to share something which was rich and beautiful and inspiring and a possibility, which is a message which will sell. It doesn't matter whether the person whose door you're knocking on for the vacuum cleaner is from this city or from that city or this part or that part. This is what I'm trying to sell. If I'm excited about it, I have a better chance than if I'm not. But the issue is, can you accomplish? This isn't selling a vacuum cleaner. This is a message of transformation. Can people be transformed? Can people be changed? Abraham believed that people could be changed. That people could change. And so, that was the way he worked. And it was effective. You talk Believing it, you can make it happen. Noah said, hold on to whatever you have. You know, there was a famous, this story plays itself out, because it's like that ongoing. The Talmud tells a story about two sages. One whose name was Hillel and the other one was Shammai. Right? Hillel is famous because on your college campus they named an organization after him. Right? And you know why they named that organization after him?
He won every time against Shammai.
Well, he won every time, but it was more than winning every time. He welcomed every time. The Talmud tells a series of 3 stories, right? And they're all one way or the other. They're also, one of them says, one person came to Hillel, to Shammai, wasn't Jewish. He says, I read about your people. I says, I would like to convert because I want to be the high priest. I want to be the Kohen Gadol. Now, as you know, I can't be the Kohen Gadol because I'm not a Kohen. Right?
No temple.
Huh?
Also,
there's no temple. Okay, details, right? But I have no chance. I can't. So he came to Shammai, and Shammai said, what are you wasting my time for? Get out of here. He came to Hillel. Hillel said, come, let's talk. And he started to teach him. And in the end, he was thrilled to learn. And he was thrilled to come into people. And he said, oh, that was ridiculous what I said. Another person came, this is the most famous one, and said, I want you to teach me the Torah while I stand here on one foot. Right? He wanted that the Torah should be, like one of those books in the self-help aisle in Barnes & Noble. Become a multi-zillionaire in 5 minutes. Right? Teach me the Torah while I'm standing here on one foot. Get rich quick. And Shammai said, get out of here. This is a serious business. What are you doing here? Don't waste my time. You want quick fixes? Go to Barnes & Noble. He didn't go to Barnes & Noble. He went to Hillel. I'm sorry. Dating myself. Who knew? So he says, go to Hillel. So he doesn't. He goes to Hillel. And he comes to Hillel. And he says, I want you to teach me the Torah while I'm standing on one foot. So Hillel said, right, reminiscent of what we discussed yesterday from Rabbi Akiva, he said, okay, no problem. He says, what you don't like, don't do to somebody else.
The rest is commentary.
And everything else is commentary. All of the Torah is commentary on loving your fellow man like yourself. And the person put his other foot down on the ground. He said, wow, that's fascinating. And he stayed, and he studied, and he learned the commentary, so to speak. And the Talmud says there was a third story, and it says that the 3 of them once happened to be traveling, and they stayed at the same hotel. And they found themselves sitting next to each other at breakfast. And says, hey, who are you? And this one tells his story. He says, wow, that happened to you? He says, that happened to me. And that happened to me. And the 3 of them said that Shammai's toughness could have left us out in the cold. But it was Hillel's welcoming, Hillel's humility and openness and welcoming that brought us to where we are today. So there's one who sees what's in front of him and says, you're obnoxious. You want something ridiculous. You're a child. Do me a favor. When you grow up, we can maybe talk. And the other one says, you know what? He wants something. Let me take that little spark and turn it into a flame. And turn it into a flame. And that was Hillel. That was Hillel who, to him, everybody was possibility. Everybody was potential. And when everybody's potential, you can get someplace. When you look at someone and you say, what is he? And by the way, you look at anybody, you'll find flaws. Nobody's perfect. You don't have to be from the generation of the flood to be imperfect. But people can focus on the possibility and see the possibility of change. And in a certain sense you might say, hey, that makes sense. The same Abraham who looked at the world, that's a complicated place, and said, look at the good that God gives us. When he looked at a person who's a complicated being, he can say, there's good in there. Let me develop it. Let me bring something out from it. So that was part of what made Avram fundamentally more capable of transforming the world. Because he had experienced transformation and he knew that it could be done. I'll tell you one other interesting tidbit. You know, part of the optimism of Jewish life, even though people like to talk about this like Jewish negativity and Jewish guilt and all this negative stuff, part of the optimism of Jewish life is that we believe with the complete belief that the world will improve and reach a point of completion. We call that Mashiach, Messiah. Messiah isn't just like, some mythical creature comes flying in here and does something. The Messiah is that the world comes to recognize that there's a God, comes to recognize the values that are part of that it will become a good world. We believe with a complete belief that that's going to happen. And we do believe that there's going to be a leader of that, the Messiah. Who is he? We don't know who he is, but we know where he comes from. We see him as being a descendant of King David, David HaMelech. That's how you refer to Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, a descendant of King David. Now, King David, it's complicated. It's complicated. King David, there was a pretty difficult story with King David. You know the story? David and Bathsheba? There's a story of King David where he saw this beautiful woman and he was interested in her. And he engineered that her husband, who was in the army at the time, would be in one of the units fighting at the front, from where there would inevitably be casualties. And lo and behold, he was one of the casualties. Bingo. That's in King David's history. Now, we have another significant person in Jewish life. His name was Joseph. He also is considered to be, to some degree, playing a role. He was the first Jew who actually became a king. He became like the viceroy of Egypt. But whatever, you know the story. Now, Joseph was tempted big time also by a beautiful woman, and he was very vulnerable. And what did he do? He jumped out a window. He ran away. He got in big trouble. She framed him. She accused him of attacking her when she was the one who was guilty. But he didn't submit. So between those two, who would you consider to be the better candidate for office? If the office is the Holy Messiah. I mean, it's like a no-brainer, isn't it? Joseph passed the test. David failed the test. Wrong. Joseph passed the test. Correct. David, he failed that test, but then he was approached about what he did. He was approached by the prophet who was there at the time and said, David, You know what you did? And David said, and he said one Hebrew word, which as usual is 3 English words. He said, Chatasi. Chatasi means, I have sinned. I have failed. No ifs, no ands, no buts. And he spent his life addressing his failure. And by the way, so little did he hide from it, that in this book of prayers which we have from King David, which is the book of Psalms, Psalm 51, the first psalm of one of the books of, it's divided up into separate books, this is what David said after he had had the relationship with Bathsheba. And it goes on to say, he says, God, I have sinned. My sin has to be opposite me all the time, and so on and so forth. So David failed. He failed. And then he picked himself up, and he did tshuva, said in those words, he addressed the failure, and he fixed it. So therefore our tradition says, so tell me something, how's the world doing? Doing great, right? If it's doing great, so then I have a perfect king for you to keep it great. I have a perfect leader for you to keep it great, to not submit to any challenges. His name would be Joseph. But the world is not great. The world is broken. And you're dreaming about a world in the future that's going to be good. So who do you need to lead you there? You need someone who is broken and figured out how to fix it. And that's our leader. That's our hero. That's our champion. Leaders who are perfect all of their lives don't succeed in making change. In making change happen in themselves or in making change happen in others. They're good at something. They stay the course. They maintain. They don't fall off. That's fantastic. That's a big deal. It's a very, very big deal. But they're not the person to bring about a world's tshuva, a world's correction. A world's correction comes from somebody who started and figured out how to do their own correction. And that's Abraham, the beginning. That's the Mashiach, that's the end. So Jewish life is built in between personalities who understand that no person is stuck. No person is stuck. That we're all there to change and to develop. And therefore it makes sense, you think, like, you speak about Balei Tshuva and people who are from birth. Right? There's an old story which is told about a young man who came to see one of the great Hasidic rabbis, the Ger Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic rabbis in Jerusalem. And the Rebbe said to him, hello, what's your name? This is my name. Where are you from? Here's where I'm from. What do you do? So he said, I am a student in Or Sameach. Now there's a yeshiva called Or Sameach in Jerusalem. And what kind of yeshiva is it? It's a Baal Tshuva yeshiva. It was maybe the first one, or one of the first ones, that was there for people from a limited background who wanted to come and to learn. So he said, I'm in Or Sameach. He says, but I'm not a Baal Tshuva. I'm not a Baal Tshuva. In other words, he went there, whatever. He said he was not a Baal Tshuva. So the Ger Rebbe said to him, why not? Why not? Says, like, what do you mean, why not? I'm not, because I was born religious. He says, Tshuva is reserved for people who didn't grow up, with tzitzis. Tshuva is a staple of Jewish life. We pray this morning. in the prayer, 3 times a day, we ask God to accept us in tshuva. That's not a bracha for, I had the right siddur, you know, it wasn't, oh, here's the siddur for FFBs, minus that bracha. Of course not. Everybody's got to change. The most significant season of the year, for the deeply observant and religious Jew, yes, is the high holidays. It's not just for people who come periodically to visit. We start it, right? I'm going to leave here, God willing, after next Shabbos. The following Shabbos will be the first day of the month preceding Rosh Hashanah, of Elul. And we're going to already start focusing on the high holidays, on tshuva, on trying to make ourselves better. Because a fundamental of life is you have to believe in change. And you have to practice change. That's where it started. That's where it started with Avram. And that's why Avram was able to save a whole world. And Noach looked at the world and said, once you slipped, once you've fallen, no backsies. Lost cause. Lost cause. Hold on for dear life, because if you slip, you can't climb back. Finished. What do you say? What do you say? You see the difference? Isn't it important to note how it fills Jewish life? Fills the framework of Jewish history? Fills how Jewish life is lived? It has to be that way. It has to be that way. You know, I sometimes give this sort of ridiculous illustration. So, Robinson Crusoe, or if you're a little bit less cultured, Gilligan, right? He gets stuck on an island. He gets stuck on an island with his wife. They go out. They rent a motorboat, and they're zooming around there in the Pacific Ocean. They go a little bit too far. They run out of gas. The boat is just stuck there in the middle of the water. And then a big storm comes, and they have nowhere to go, and they dive off, and they arrive at a little island. No boat, no nothing, no flares. Nothing. And they're there on the island. And they try to signal. They realize very, very quickly they're not finding anybody. And they're stuck on the island, the two of them. And they learn how to live on the island. They're there for weeks, for months. And they learn how to live on the island. And it's just the two of them. And one day, it had been building, but one day, Mr. Caruso, or Mr. Gilligan, really gets on his wife's nerves. And she says, that's it. I had enough. We're getting divorced. Sometimes when I say that, people laugh. Make me feel good. Laugh. No, I'm just kidding. Right? So, why is that ridiculous?
They're on an island by themselves.
They're on an island by themselves. So what are they going to do? What does that mean? They're going to get divorced?
She takes one side of the
And then, so that's what you think? That's what they're going to do? So she'll be upset with him, and until he figures out how to soften things up and get things right and apologize properly, she's going to give him the cold shoulder. She's not going to want to have dinner with him. But come on, you got to get over it. If forgiveness wasn't invented yet, they would have had to invent it, right? Because what are they going to do? It's just them. But sometimes, when you say, oh, okay, forget him, or forget her, and let's go on to something else, we have nothing which compels us to say, let's believe in change. Let's try to make change. Sometimes we're not motivated to make change, because we'll say, okay, so she's upset, fine, so there'll be somebody else. If people start instead with a absolute commitment, I'm getting married to this person, and from here on, the way we view things is that it's the two of us on a desert island. We're creating something absolute, lasting. Look, I want to tell you, if one day on that desert island he starts chasing her around the island with a machete, which is the only thing that he managed to salvage from the boat, you better believe it. She's not going near him. She'll put up a wall if she has to. Even though it's the two of them alone on a desert island. Until and unless somehow, whatever, the circuits get rewired. It's not enough to apologize. But short of that, let's figure it out. Let's figure out how to change. Belief in change is what allows a world to continue in the time of Abraham. It's what allows our worlds to continue, our relationships to continue. Without belief in change, you're just like negative, it's gone, it's finished, over. Okay. So that's a core belief. Belief in the possibility of change. So now, we only have a few minutes left together this morning. I want to just sort of segue into the next paragraph that we're up to. Okay? So some of you have the sheet, some of you don't. Here, for those of you who don't, please pass around. Where we're up to is the top of 573, paragraph 4. So the top of paragraph of page 573, paragraph 3, was the 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, who were increasingly angering him until Abraham came and got the reward of them all. Meaning, the whole world was saved because of him. So therefore, everybody's existence, in a certain sense, he deserves credit for. Here he is, Abraham, right? What did you bring up yesterday when we were learning about the Jewish people being children compared to everybody else? Right? He spread the good beliefs to the world. He was the original light unto the rest of the nations. Now, Asar Nisyonos Nisnas Avram Avinu, paragraph 4. Our father Abraham was tested with 10 trials, and he withstood them all. Lodia kama chiboso shel Avram Avinu, to show the degree, here it translates, of Abraham's love for God. 10 challenges, and he withstood them all. 10 tests. And that shows how much Avram was committed to God. Anybody know the tests? You know some, you don't know all. Good. Give me 2.
Killing his son.
The offering of his son, the binding of Isaac.
Leaving his country of birth.
Perfect. Excellent. Huh?
Circumcise himself.
He was asked to circumcise himself.
Jumping into the fire.
Jumping into the fire, perhaps. So I say perhaps, only because some say that the 10 are all openly written in the Torah, and the one of the fire is a medrash. It's not open in the Torah. Some say that the one which you said was the first one, and some say it didn't make the list because it's not explicit in the Torah. There's a debate about what exactly the 10 challenges are.
Shoo his son away.
To send his son away when his son wasn't doing right. Of all of them, only one was labeled a test. The Torah uses the word God tested Avram, the phrase God tested Avram, only once. And that's by the ultimate test, which was where God said to him, You know that child you were waiting for all those years to have? I want you to offer him up to me as an offering. The binding of Isaac. A story which is mind-blowing, which doesn't fit anything that we could imagine, which we're going to spend not today, but hopefully tomorrow talking about. I don't know if we'll finish tomorrow, but we'll spend, at least God willing, a nice part of tomorrow morning talking about it. But let's first just ask ourselves, for the little bit of time that we have, so why does God have to test them? Why does God have to test him? Why does God have to test him? This is my question to you. So, you took calculus? Unfortunately. How many people were in your calculus class?
Started with 200, finished with 25.
Started with 200.
Of course,
Huh?
it's an online course, 200 people.
No, in many schools, calculus is like a basic. Anybody doing anything in the sciences has to take calculus 1. So, it's a course. In a large university, you'll have 300 people, 400 people in the course. That's what the theater classrooms are created for, these kinds of things. They're like there as part of the thing. Right? Anybody have that experience?
Yes.
Yes. So, the professor gives you a test. What's that?
There's a reason why they use numbering system.
Right. What are you? You're a barcode.
Yep.
Right? The professor gives you a test. And you do the test, and as a result, he gives you a grade. You understand why the professor has to give you a test? He doesn't even know you. Right? In that course of 300 people, over the semester, you think he's going to know 10 students? If he's outgoing. He'll know 10 students. Otherwise, it's ridiculous, right? He's with them for a few hours a day. He needs to give them a test at the end, and that way we know, do you know this stuff? Don't you know this stuff? Okay, now imagine you're going to some nice private school, right, or you're in a graduate program, and you're taking Calculus 17. Okay? And you're sitting at a seminar table, right, with the instructor. And there are 9 people around the table with the instructor. And you do a semester of Calculus 17 with them. Tell me something. Does the professor need to give you a test at the end of the semester to know whether you know your stuff?
Yes.
Why?
Because even though you can be with them and learning it, there still should be some stress involved to get through a sign of accomplishment rather than...
Okay. So, but what you said, your explanation of your answer, excuse me if I say, is a little different than the core of the answer. The core of the answer was, does the professor need to test him to know how he knows the stuff?
Yeah.
And he knows it. He knows that he knows it. But as you said, the stress of coming to produce the material will in itself be a beneficial thing. It'll be a beneficial thing. You could say, I saw this guy. I saw him in the Olympics, right? And he is able to bench press 350 pounds. It's amazing. He's able to bench press 350 pounds. Okay, the mosquito Olympics, whatever it is, right? He's able to bench press 350 pounds. Wow. And you meet him 6 months later, and you say, I see, you can bench press 350 pounds. And he'll say to you, I actually can't. I saw you can. I was able to, but as soon as I won that medal, I joined the beer Olympics. Right? I finished. I did what I had to do, and I'm done. I haven't lifted weights, hardly, in 6 months. I can't do it anymore. If I work, I'll be able to do it. If I test my muscles, if I stretch my muscles, if I extend myself, I will do it. I will build them up. But otherwise, they atrophy. A test can be when somebody doesn't know, when that professor of 300 students has no idea which one of the students was studying, which one was listening, which one was, not even showing up. So we need a test. We'll figure out what they are, where they're up to. But even if you know, and you know that they were with it, and so on and so forth, the exercise of taking the test builds the strength, builds the muscles. God didn't need to test Abraham to know what Abraham was up to. Not because it was a seminar. To God, the whole world is a seminar. God knows what everybody's up to. But potential is different than actual. To translate the potential into something, Abraham had 10 tests. What that means was that even though Abraham himself, by the time he started, by the time he gave into God's orbit, which was that he had discovered God, he had already, so to speak, passed the test. But he had to have a life of growth and change. And it would come through all of these stories, these tests, which would bring him to growth and change. This is the beginning of the Jewish people. Change. Anything can change, anybody can change, and you could be Abraham, and you still need to change. You need to build and build and build. Tests, push the limits. It's not just in weightlifting, it's not just in, getting your mile speed down, when you're a runner. People have to be spiritually ambitious. People have to be spiritually ambitious to try to be better people, stronger people, have God in their life more, have goodness in their life more. That's the nisyonos. Those are the tests of Abraham. So we'll look at them a little bit with a special focus on the hardest one of them all, the label test, the binding of Isaac. What on earth is that story about?